The village slept uneasily beneath a sky swollen with clouds, as if the heavens themselves wished to smother the earth in silence. A mist rolled in from the marshes, curling around the thatched roofs and choking the narrow lanes like a thief in the night. In that mist came the sound of hooves, slow, deliberate, unhurried. A single rider moved along the muddy road, wrapped in armor as black as obsidian, helm lowered, visor sealed. No crest adorned his shield, no banner announced his house. He was a void on horseback, a shadow given iron and flesh. Dogs howled and then fell silent. Windows slammed shut. The few souls still awake pressed themselves against door frames, holding breath as the rider passed. They whispered names they had been warned never to speak. Some called him the Black Knight. Others swore he was the devil's huntsman. To the children, he was a tale meant to keep them from wandering into the woods after dark. To the elders, he was a reminder of bargains made long ago in blood. But none dared confront him, for the air around him seemed heavier than storm clouds, a pressure that bent courage into submission. The knight's horse, a great beast with eyes like coals, snorted steam into the mist. Its hooves struck the stones like muffled drums, each step a warning that the knight had grown teeth. He did not look left or right, but kept his gaze fixed on the road ahead. At his side hung a sword long enough to cleave a man in two, its scabbard worn and scarred. Some swore the blade whispered when unsheathed, calling for blood as a wolf calls for the hunt. The villagers could not say if that was true, and none wished to learn. At the edge of the square, the rider drew his horse to a halt. The well stood there, its rope swaying though no wind stirred. The black helm tilted as if listening to something beneath the earth. Then, without word or gesture, he turned and guided his mount toward the abandoned church at the hill's crest. The church had been left to ruin for 20 years. Ever since the plague had swept through the valley, crosses lay toppled, stained glass shattered, its saints eyeless and forgotten. No man entered, for it was said the dead still prayed there. Yet the Black Knight rode directly to its doors. He dismounted with a silence uncanny for such armor, the metal groaning only once before obeying. He pushed the rotting wood aside, and the knight seemed to recoil, the mist refusing to follow him in. Villagers who had crept from their shutters saw only the shadow of his form, swallowed by darkness. They crossed themselves, whispered hurried prayers, and fled indoors. For some doors are better left unopened, and some riders better left unchallenged. The morning came gray and bitter, as if dawn itself hesitated to touch the valley. Smoke rose thin from the cottages, but no voices carried in the lanes. The market square, usually alive with barter and gossip, lay hushed. Only the well rope creaked back and forth, a pendulum marking dread. Men gathered in uneasy knots, eyes flicking toward the hill where the church loomed. Women clutched their children closer, whispering of curses, of omens, of the rider who had vanished into ruin. No one dared climb the hill to confirm what had transpired within. Fear makes its own truth, and in silence that truth only deepens. The village elder, bent and trembling, tried to speak courage. Perhaps he was a knight returning from war, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps he seeks only shelter. But the younger men shook their heads. No knight bears armor without crest. No knight rides without banner. And no man of God enters that church. They spat into the dirt to ward off evil. He is marked, one muttered. I saw it with my own eyes. The mist bent around him like it obeyed him. Another added, and his horse's eyes burned red like coals from hell. They argued, but always in whispers, as though the walls themselves might betray them. By midday, the priest's apprentice dared venture near the church. He returned pale, lips trembling. Candles burn inside, he whispered, though no hand lit them. And I heard voices. Not one voice, but two, speaking like water over stone. The people gasped, some clutching charms, others falling to their knees. The elder raised a shaking hand. Seal your doors. Do not wander after dark. If he is what we fear, then night belongs to him. His words spread faster than fire, and the village became a tomb of its own making. That evening, when the sun bled into the horizon, the bells of the ruined church tolled. They had been rusted silent for decades, their tongues broken, their ropes rotted. Yet now they rang, deep and resonant, as if awakened by some hand unseen. Each strike echoed through the valley, rattling windows, stilling breath. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Men gripped pitchforks they had no courage to raise. And from the shadows beneath the hill, eyes watched the cottages glinting, patient, promising that the Black Knight's return was not the village's greatest fear. The true terror was what had answered him inside the church. Within the church, dust lay thick upon the stones, yet no dust stirred where the knight walked. His armor whispered against itself a chorus of iron sighs. Candles guttered on their stands, though no hand had struck flint. Their flames bent inward, drawn toward the figure as though seeking the warmth of his shadow. Broken pews lined the nave, carved saints headless, their features worn smooth by time and neglect. At the altar lay a great cross toppled, its wood blackened as though struck by lightning. He knelt before it not in reverence but in possession, as though claiming ruin as his domain. The knight removed his gauntlet and pressed a hand against the stone floor. "I am here," he murmured, voice low and hollow, echoing in a place where no echo should return. For a moment nothing answered. Then the shadows behind the altar stirred, coalescing into form, not flesh, not smoke, but something in between, a shape that defied edges. Two eyes opened within it, red as embers smothered in ash. A voice rose, layered and strange, both whisper and thunder. "You return, Oath-bearer. The pact is not forgotten." The knight bowed his head, nor broken. His voice carried no fear. "I come to renew what was promised." The shape swelled, filling the apse with cold, pressing against the knight's armor as if to seep within. "The king yet lives," the voice said. "And while he lives, your chains remain. Give me his throne, give me his blood, and I will give you eternity." The knight's visor lifted slightly, revealing a mouth drawn into a hard line. "You swore me strength, and strength you gave. You swore me power, and power I wield. Now swear me dominion, and I will cut down the king with my own hand." The shadow laughed, a sound like stones grinding in a grave. "Then it is sealed. Strike at his heart, and all you desire shall be yours." The knight closed his visor once more, rose, and placed his gauntlet back upon his hand. He stood taller now, as if the darkness had filled him with new marrow. As he turned, the candles flared blood red, and the broken cross smoldered faintly, as if remembering fire. He left the church in silence, but behind him the voice lingered. "Go, and the world will learn that some crowns are forged in hell." The knight rode from the church before dawn, his armor still carrying the chill of shadows. The village dared not look from their shutters, but they heard the hoofbeats fading toward the castle road. Behind him the ruined church stood silent again, yet smoke rose faintly from its broken steeple, as if the stones themselves exhaled after centuries of suffocation. The pact was sealed, though only two souls knew it, the knight who carried its burden, and the presence that had bound him tighter than any chain. As he rode, memories pressed upon him like ghosts. Once, long ago, he had been a man of flesh with a name sung in battle songs. Once, a banner had flown over his lance. Once, he had knelt not before shadows, but before a king he swore to serve. That man was gone. What remained was armor filled with silence, bound by promises that stank of sulfur. His hand touched the hilt of his sword. It vibrated faintly like a predator restless in its cage. The shadow's words repeated in his mind. "Strike at his heart, and eternity will be yours." The castle rose on the horizon, gray stone lit gold by first light. Its towers pierced the sky like spears thrust against heaven. To others it was a fortress. To him it was a tomb awaiting excavation. Within those walls dwelled the king, still living, still breathing, still holding the throne that the pact demanded be surrendered. The knight's pulse quickened, though his face betrayed nothing beneath the visor. Destiny clattered with every hoofbeat, and destiny did not ask permission. When the gates opened at his approach, soldiers shifted nervously. No banner, no crest, no voice, yet they parted, as though commanded by some unspoken authority. In the courtyard, the clatter of training ceased, men halting mid-strike to stare at the black figure astride his beast. Whispers stirred like leaves. Is he knight or ghost? Did the king summon him, or did the grave release him? The knight dismounted without a word, his boots striking the stone like verdicts. He moved through the hall where tapestries hung heavy with the history of victories. None of them bore his face. None remembered him. That absence burned hotter than fire. The king awaited in the throne room, flanked by advisors and priests. He was not young, but his presence filled the chamber like a tide fills a harbor. His crown gleamed in torchlight, a sun in a sea of shadow. When his gaze fell upon the knight, recognition flickered, not of man, but of omen. "You come unannounced," the king said, his voice steady yet cautious. "What seeks you here, armored stranger?" The knight bowed stiffly, the gesture practiced but hollow. "Service," he said, voice echoing within the helm. It was the first word the courtiers had heard from him, and it crawled across the chamber like smoke. Then you will serve, the king answered. Our borders bleed. The north stirs with raiders. If your arm is as heavy as your silence, it will be put to use. Defend my realm, and you will have place at my table. The knight inclined his head, but inside his mind the shadow laughed. The pact was unfolding exactly as promised. Soon the king would welcome his own executioner into his heart. That evening the court feasted, though no cheer flavored the air. The hall blazed with torches, minstrels played, and servants carried platters of venison and bread. Yet every eye returned again and again to the silent figure seated near the dais. The Black Knight ate nothing, drank nothing. He sat motionless, helm on, visor lowered, as though to eat would break whatever spell bound him. Some courtiers whispered he was a man cursed never to remove his armor. Others swore nothing lived beneath the steel, only ashes and rage. The king alone studied him with the wariness of a man who has seen shadows move too close. Priests offered blessings, but their hands trembled. The bishop's words faltered as he caught sight of the knight's gauntlet resting upon the table, fingers clawed as if always gripping some invisible throat. Children of nobles, curious and unafraid, sneaked glances until their mothers pulled them away. Music faltered, rose faltered again. Fear is contagious, and the knight carried it like plague. Yet he said nothing, and silence is sometimes louder than song. When the feast ended, the king called him aside. You ride north tomorrow, he said, voice low, meant only for the night. Raiders cross our borders. Our people burn while our neighbors laugh. You will go and you will crush them. His eyes narrowed. But hear me. If your silence hides treachery, it will be your grave. I have buried greater men than you. The knight inclined his head, offering neither protest nor promise. The pact whispered in his skull. Deliver him to me. The moment comes. That night he stood in the armory, polishing a sword that needed no polish. The steel hummed faintly, alive with the shadow's hunger. He remembered the voice at the altar. Give me his blood, and eternity is yours. His gauntlet tightened on the hilt. Once, long ago, he had sworn to this same king. Sworn with a name that had been stripped from him. Betrayal had birthed him. Betrayal now sustained him. He raised the sword before the brazier's glow, and the flames bent toward it like reeds in a storm. Tomorrow, he murmured, voice like gravel. Tomorrow the pact will drink. The northern road stretched like a scar across the land. Winding through forests stripped bare by winter winds, the Black Knight rode at the head of a company of soldiers, their banners snapping in the cold air. They kept their distance, though duty bound them to his command. His silence unnerved them. His presence pressed on their chests like iron weights. Around campfires they muttered that he was no man but an omen, that his armor held not flesh but emptiness. Yet when raiders struck at dawn, it was his blade that cut through them like thunder through trees. He fought with a fury beyond mortal measure, each strike clean, decisive, merciless. The soldiers followed, half in awe, half in fear. That night, as the fires crackled and men stitched their wounds, the knight sat apart. His sword lay across his knees, humming faintly like a living thing. He stared into the flames until they twisted into shapes, faces he remembered. Faces he had slain. Then the shadows lengthened and the fire bent inward. The voice returned, smooth and terrible. You feel it, don't you? The taste of dominion. They follow you, though they fear you. They obey, though they hate you. This is power, knight, but it is not yet eternity. Eternity waits in the king's blood. The knight closed his eyes. He trusts me now, he murmured. He calls me his shield. The shadow laughed, a hollow echo. A shield can be a dagger when turned. You swore to me, oath-bearer. Do not falter now. Bring me his crown and your name will never fade again. His gauntlets tightened, sparks spitting from the blade as if feeding on his turmoil. He remembered the villagers crossing themselves at his passing. He remembered the whispers of children who thought him monster. He remembered kneeling at the altar, giving his soul away for strength. What was left to resist? What was left to redeem? When dawn broke, the soldiers hailed him as savior of the border. But within his helm, his jaw clenched. Each cheer was a nail driven deeper into his resolve. Each salute was a rope tightening around his will. The pact waited, patient, unrelenting. And though he rode as a hero, he knew he carried treason within his shadow. The campaign against the northern raiders ended in swift blood. Villages once blackened by fire now smoldered under the knight's iron discipline. Where he passed, silence followed both victory and dread. Soldiers sang of him as savior, yet their eyes betrayed unease, for his mercy was thinner than frost. He gave no speeches, claimed no spoils, and spoke only when necessity forced his tongue. To them he was not comrade, but storm unpredictable, ungovernable but impossible to resist. The king's banners fluttered in triumph, yet beneath those colors treachery already stirred. Reports of defeat reached the raiders' allies, who vowed retaliation. The king ordered reinforcements sent, but the knight intercepted the messengers. With a voice like steel dragged across stone, he gave them false paths. Instead of marching to defend the borders, troops wandered into swamps where they starved, or into ambushes where arrows sang them down. Rumors spread quickly. The king's orders were failing, his command faltering. Villagers muttered that perhaps the gods had withdrawn their favor. Each failure was a seed, planted carefully by the knight's unseen hand. At night, when campfires flickered low, he whispered into the darkness. "I have begun," he said, voice steady, almost reverent. And the shadow answered, curling around his armor like smoke through cracks in stone. "Good. Let the people doubt, let the lords whisper. A crown falls not only by sword but by faith undone. Soon he will be alone, and then you will strike." The knight bowed his head unseen, a supplicant in black steel. Yet a part of him small, buried deep, still remembered kneeling once before the same king in loyalty. That memory burned like a coal under ash. But the Pact smothered it, fed upon it, turned it into fuel for betrayal. By the time the knight returned to the castle with news of victory, the seeds had grown. Lords argued in the great hall. Priests muttered that omens were ill. The king sat heavier upon his throne, suspicion etching lines into his brow. He welcomed the knight as hero, but unease colored his voice. "You return with triumph, yet I hear my armies falter where your shadow does not fall." What truth lies between these tales? The knight bowed low, visor gleaming. "Truth, my king, is a sword. It cuts according to the hand that wields it." His words earned silence and a deeper mistrust. The betrayal had begun. Whispers thickened in the castle like cobwebs in corners. Servants carried rumors faster than bread. Priests warned of a curse clinging to the knight's armor, a darkness older than oaths. In the cloisters, monks whispered of a pact sealed in forgotten scripture, where a man traded his soul for steel that never broke. And in the council chamber the king himself began to watch with sharpened eyes. He had seen victory before, but never one that stank of rot beneath its perfume. He called for his high priest, a man whose hands had anointed kings and buried them. "What walks in my hall wearing black?" he demanded. The priest's face paled. "A man once, perhaps, but now a vessel. I see the mark of chains not forged by mortal smiths." The king paced, cloak sweeping the floor like storm clouds. "He fights for me, yet doubt festers where he walks. He saves my realm, yet my lords murmur rebellion. How can both be true?" The priest lowered his eyes. "Because he serves not you, but something else. I have smelled the sulfur on his breath, the ash in his shadow. My king, you dine with a wolf who wears a man's helm." The king's jaw hardened. "Then I must test the wolf." He summoned the knight under pretense of gratitude. In the throne room, before lords and priests, he placed a hand upon the black shoulder plate. "You have bled for me," he declared. "Tonight we feast in your honor." He raised a cup of wine, but his eyes never left the visor. The knight did not drink. Instead, he raised his gauntlet in salute and set the cup aside untouched. A murmur rippled through the hall. The king's suspicion sharpened into certainty. A man who does not eat, does not drink, does not laugh, is he man at all? The question hung heavier than the crown. That night the king walked alone through the chapel, torchlight trembling against holy icons. He prayed not for victory but for truth. "If he is oathbreaker, let his own shadow betray him," he whispered. And in the silence he thought he heard the faintest echo of laughter, not from heaven, but from beneath the earth. The great hall was cleared of revelers, its torches dimmed to embers. Only the throne blazed with firelight, casting the king in gold against a sea of darkness. The Black Knight stood before him, visor lowered, sword at his side. The courtiers had been dismissed. Only guards and priests lingered, tense as bowstrings. The king's voice rang like a hammer on anvil. "You came to me offering service. You brought victory, yet also whispers of ruin. Now I ask plainly, whom do you serve?" The knight's silence stretched long, a noose tightening. Then he lifted his visor halfway, revealing eyes hollowed by years, burning with something not wholly human. "I serve the Pact," he said. Gasps tore through the chamber. The high priest staggered back, clutching his staff. The king rose, cloak flaring. "Then you are no knight of mine. You are traitor, oathbreaker, Shadow's pawn." His hand went to his sword. The knight drew his own, and the hall shuddered with the clash of steel. The fight was thunder in stone walls. The king struck with the fury of a man defending crown and bloodline. The knight answered with the weight of unholy strength. Sparks leapt with every blow, flames bending as though eager to witness. Guards rushed forward, but a wave of black force hurled them back, the shadow itself aiding its vessel. Priests chanted prayers, their voices quivering against the storm. The king's blade cut deep into the knight's armor, but black smoke hissed from the wound, sealing it shut. The knight swung with a roar, shattering shields, driving the king to his knees. Yet the king rose again, blood on his brow but fire in his eyes. "You gave your soul away," he spat, "but you will not have mine." He drove his blade through the knight's chest, straight into the furnace where his heart had once lived. The hall shook as the knight screamed not in pain but in rage. Shadows poured from the wound like oil, flooding the chamber. Courtiers fled, guards fell, priest wept. In the storm of darkness, only the king's crown still gleamed, defiant as the sun at midnight. The confrontation had begun, and neither man nor demon would leave unchanged. The hall drowned in shadow, torches smothered, prayers choked mid-breath. The Black Knight staggered, the king's blade buried deep in his chest, its hilt trembling as though alive. He grasped the steel with gauntleted hands, trying to wrench it free, but the weapon burned with sanctity, glowing faintly against the tide of darkness. For the first time, the knight's voice broke not with fury but with despair. "You cannot stop what I have become." Black smoke poured from the wound, shrieking faces twisting within it, the souls he had traded away for power. They clawed at the air, whispering his name, dragging him toward the abyss. The king braced himself, both hands on the sword, driving it deeper. His teeth clenched, his crown tilted, his strength wrung from marrow. "If you serve the Pact," he growled, "then you will fall with it." The knight roared, a sound that split stone, a sound not wholly mortal. His armor cracked, splitting like eggshell under fire, revealing glimpses of flesh long corrupted, skin etched with runes, veins pumping shadow instead of blood. The courtiers who had not fled fell to their knees, covering eyes, for to look upon him was to see damnation in human shape. The shadow howled, desperate, promising, "Strike him down, oath-bearer, and live forever. Cast the king aside, and eternity is yours." The knight faltered, his gauntlets shaking, torn between two chains, the pact that bound him and the memory of the man he once was. For a heartbeat, the hall saw not monster but man, a warrior who had once sworn to protect the very king he now tried to destroy. His visor fell away, clattering to the floor. Eyes once proud now burned with regret. "Eternity," he whispered, voice breaking. "Is no crown." And with that he released the sword. The shadow shrieked, tearing itself free, fleeing upward in a storm of black flame. The knight collapsed, armor emptying like a husk, his body dissolving into ash that scattered across the stones. The hall stilled. The king fell to one knee, his hand still gripping the hilt of the sword that now rested in silence. Smoke thinned. Torches rekindled. The high priest approached, voice trembling. "It is done." But the king shook his head. "No, it has only begun. For every pact leaves an echo, and echoes return." The ashes of the Black Knight stirred once, carried by unseen wind, whispering words no ear wished to catch. The people would tell of that night for generations, not as victory, not as tragedy, but as warning, that some bargains promise eternity, but eternity demands the soul. The crown remained. The king endured. But in the corners of the realm where shadows gather, the tale of the Black Knight's pact lived on, reminding all that every oath has a price, and some prices are paid forever.